unite today or fracture? That's the question we're asking, along with the issue of energy prices. Ofgem is setting its new energy price cap today. But what about the UK's energy security? And why haven't we been building enough domestic capacity? All that to come after the headlines.
Good morning, it's 9:31. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The President of the European Commission is meeting the Prime Minister today for final talks on the Northern Ireland Protocol. Number 10 says Ursula von der Leyen will meet Rishi Sunak in Windsor to discuss a range of complex challenges around the post-Brexit trading arrangements. The current deal allows goods to be transported across the Irish land border without the need for checks. Downing Street has suggested the talks could lead to a deal after months of negotiations with Brussels about fixing the protocol. Households are expected to pay around £500 more on their energy bills from April. The energy regulator has reduced the cap on the amount energy suppliers can charge customers, but bills are expected to rise. Ofgem announced the cap on that amount that households pay on electricity and gas bills that will drop to £3,280 from the 1st of April. Despite this, customers are likely to pay 20% more on their annual bills as the government's additional support only partially protects them. Ministers are due to hold emergency talks with supermarket bosses today amid the current vegetable crisis. Food Minister Mark Spencer has summoned bosses from all the major chains to find a way to get shelves fully stocked again. The vegetable shortage is expected to last up to 4 weeks, with bad weather likely to affect the amount of fresh produce imported into the UK. Several supermarkets, including Tesco, followed by Aldi, Asda and Morrisons, have introduced customer limits on certain items, including tomatoes, peppers and cucumbers. The number of people killed after a migrant boat crashed into rocks off the coast of southern Italy has risen to 61. The boat, which left from Turkey, was thought to be carrying up to 200 migrants from Somalia, Pakistan and Afghanistan, including several children. 27 bodies were found on a beach in Calabria and more were found in the water after the boat crashed against rocks during rough seas. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Tom Harwood.
A very good morning to you. It's 9:34 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, Ursula von der Leyen is along her way to the United Kingdom, set to arrive at number 10 around lunchtime for what is essentially a lot of theatre. Yes, what a build as the final talks on the Northern Ireland Protocol deal are, in reality, likely to have been already agreed. This is a bit of show. This is how the Prime Minister is presenting what is the conclusion of a long-lasting negotiation. Well, after his meeting with the EU Commission President in number 10, Sunak will then chair an extraordinary meeting of the Cabinet. At that Cabinet, the PM will speak, so will the Foreign Secretary and the Northern Ireland Secretary, setting out the details of the deal to all their other ministers. Following that, the Prime Minister is not done. He's off to Derbyshire, where there will be a joint press conference with Ursula von der Leyen, and perhaps our first opportunity to see the details of this potential deal. It certainly seems that we are now hours, rather than weeks or months or indeed years, away from this deal that has been so long awaited. Well, let's talk through the political implications of this with the Deputy Editor of Conservative Home, Henry Hill. Henry, thank you for joining us this morning. Rishi Sunak has taken a bit of a gamble here, and all eyes, to some extent, will be on what people like Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg, or indeed Mark Francois have to say. The Conservative Party could really unite today, or it could fracture.
Yeah, absolutely. The votes in Parliament for passing a deal on Northern Ireland are basically guaranteed to be there. Labour have said that they will back it. It's hard to imagine circumstances in which Rishi Sunak gets a deal from Brussels that Sir Keir Starmer won't support. So he can pass it. But obviously, in reality, the Prime Minister's situation in Parliament is quite precarious on a day-to-day basis. The Conservative Party is very divided. That parliamentary majority, which on paper is still quite big, is in reality a lot smaller. And so if he passes a deal in the teeth of opposition from groups such as the ERG, that could potentially cause him a lot of trouble over the medium term. So yes, if they don't like this deal, he could still pass it, but it could cause him a world of political pain nonetheless.
And crucially, how the different parties respond to this could be an opportunity for Labour. Labour have been trying to talk about other things, and frankly, to some extent, that might well be more where the country is. Does the Prime Minister risk all of the news and fanfare today, the talks with Ursula von der Leyen, does he risk undoing a sense that the country had felt Brexit was done? The sense that Boris Johnson got in 2019, wrapped it all up. Well, now Rishi Sunak seems to be picking it apart a little.
Yeah, to an extent, although, of course, Northern Ireland has continually been in the press without the deal. So I think that's the trade-off for the governments, is that people are going to be talking about Northern Ireland anyway. And, of course, successive prime ministers have had to deal with the fact that Boris Johnson didn't really get Brexit done. He got Brexit mostly done, but Northern Ireland was the great unfinished bit of that jigsaw, and someone was going to have to do something about it, and that's what Rishi Sunak is doing. But yet, absolutely, the whole appeal of the phrase "get Brexit done" is that not everyone wants to be fixated on this question forever. The whole point of Brexit was supposed to be that it would allow governments to focus more on people's domestic priorities, and seeing people once again going back to this trough, it could very well alienate people from the government.
Rishi Sunak will need to sell this, and I suppose this is what today is all about. It's overwhelmingly likely that everything about this deal has already been agreed. Ursula von der Leyen isn't coming over with sort of a big ballpoint pen to sort of make textual changes. That's not how negotiations work. The prime ministers or presidents themselves don't do that. Do you think it's likely that this deal was actually done over a week ago? And the whole travelling backwards and forwards from Belfast and sort of speaking in Parliament, meeting with different groups, saying that it hasn't been done, has this all been an act from Number 10?
Yeah, the thing to remember about European negotiations is there are 27 EU member states. It takes quite a long time. It's a cumbersome decision-making mechanism. That's one of the reasons that we struggled with our membership. So, yeah, absolutely. They will have agreed something. They will have agreed it over a week ago. They will probably have agreed the entire thing weeks ago. And the EU negotiators are not going to have gone back to all 27 countries saying, look, we need to fine-tune all of this. No, this deal has been done for a while. I think one of the big problems with this process, actually, is that given the whole thing is supposed to be trying to square unionism and reconcile unionism to the arrangement, Northern Irish unionists have not been in the room, which means that Rishi Sunak actually hasn't presented his deal to the people who need to accept it until it's already sealed, as it were, which is a problem for him if it's not good enough.
Yes, I was talking to some people who were in the Theresa May administration in the middle of last week, who were frankly amazed that Rishi Sunak seemed to be making some of the same mistakes that Theresa May herself made, with the sort of surprise when the DUP didn't get on board, or initially didn't get on board. I wonder whether or not the same mistakes will now be sort of fixed, given there was this delay in announcing the details. Maybe some more sweet talking of the DUP has been going on behind closed doors. I suppose to some extent we'll be listening very much more carefully to what the DUP say in the coming hours than potentially Conservative backbenchers.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, there's basically two levels on which this deal can be understood. The first off is constitutionally, it's a deal between the United Kingdom and Brussels, and it can be passed by the UK Parliament, and it is negotiated by the UK government. But realistically, the reason that a deal is being delivered on this timetable is because in April, it's the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. They want Stormont, the devolved assembly there, back up and running so that Joe Biden can come and visit and everyone can celebrate, that landmark. If there's no Stormont, they can't do that. And the DUP have walked out of Stormont over the protocol. So yeah, absolutely, politically, and this was something that government sources were telling me before December, they accepted. There is basically, this deal won't fix anything, if the unionists don't accept it enough to go back into Stormont.
Now, just finally, of course, Rishi Sunak is gearing up for local elections in just a couple of months' time. There's all sorts of rumours about what might happen to him following those local elections. The Conservative Party still 20 points behind in the polls compared to the Labour Party. Is Rishi Sunak's premiership at risk?
I personally wouldn't think so. The local elections are shaping up to be very bad indeed, but a lot of this is about expectations. And frankly, people have known that the local elections are going to be horrifying for the Conservatives for quite some time. And the thing is, if you get rid of Rishi, you almost certainly at that point you have to have a general election, given how many times you've changed Prime Minister in one Parliament. And who wants to go into a general election when you're 20 plus points behind in the polls? So no, I think he's probably safe, although it won't be a comfortable time.
Well, Henry Hill, thank you so much for talking through the political implications of what is set to be a huge day in Westminster. Really appreciate your time this morning. Let's cross across to Northern Ireland now to speak to Amanda Ferguson, a Northern Ireland-based journalist who's been following the details of this very, very closely. And just in a very broad brush overview, what do we expect that this deal might actually say?
Well, the deal's likely to say that goods that are moving from Britain into Northern Ireland won't be subject to checks, but the goods that are moving in through into the EU single market, the Republic of Ireland, will be. However, I think the big sticking point is going to be around the role of the ECJ, because Sammy Wilson, the East Antrim MP, was saying yesterday that Northern Ireland shouldn't be governed by law outside of the UK. However, the UK government accepts that the EU's will need to have the ECJ will need to have jurisdiction of some description. So how you square that circle remains to be seen. But it's going to be important that the DUP and unionist politicians from across the spectrum have been staying off the airwaves this morning, because they really don't have anything to say until they see the detail of the deal. And it should be emphasised as well that while the DUP is the barrier to devolution at the moment, what all of the non-unionist parties think, and also crucially what the business community in Northern Ireland thinks, is going to be really important as well.
This is a really interesting point, that the DUP have been very quiet so far. It emphasises how the DUP, the big players here, the reason why power sharing isn't working in Northern Ireland right now, they haven't seen the text of this deal. Backbench members of Parliament haven't seen the text of this deal. Practically the only people who have are the Prime Minister, the Northern Ireland Secretary and the Foreign Secretary.
We're going to all get to see it together, I think, is the plan. And, if it doesn't restore devolution in Northern Ireland, then really what has been the point of it? We haven't had fully functioning government in this jurisdiction since February of last year. Now, the DUP would argue that they view Stormont as leverage, the only leverage they have in the negotiations, which are between the EU and the UK. They aren't a player in this. However, their critics and opponents will say that it hardly caused the two negotiating sides to come to an agreement overnight, and the progress has been made through Rishi Sunak since the threat of the protocol bill and unilateral action was kind of removed from the table. So as ever, whenever it comes to Northern Ireland, it's never just about one thing. This is about the politics. It's not just about the post-Brexit trading arrangement. It's about constitution and so on. And while unionists would view the protocol as something constitutionally damaging, regardless of the detail of that, the Good Friday Agreement is very clear that the only way the constitutional position of Northern Ireland changes is if people vote for it. So it'll be interesting to see what happens next. But I don't expect the DUP to jump to immediately just tie this up in a little neat bow in time for the anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. They're going to want to pore over the detail of it, as will everybody else.
Now, looking at the timeline of today's choreography, really, we've got this meeting in number 10. Then we've got, with the Prime Minister and Ursula von der Leyen, of course. Then we've got a cabinet meeting, and then a press conference out in Berkshire. Now, I suppose we're not going to see the detail of this deal until pretty late afternoon. Would you expect then we're not going to hear from the DUP necessarily, potentially until tomorrow?
That is a possibility. However, some senior DUP politicians are quite fond of what we like to call a solo run. So you might hear from someone like Sammy Wilson or one of the more senior figures. Maybe you might hear from Lord Dodds. The DUP hasn't made clear at all today when it's going to speak on this. They're going to want to look at the detail and establish quickly whether they do or don't like it. And I suppose that just remains to be seen. There is a possibility that they speak this evening, but there's no indication of that so far. And I think that there's a lot riding on this for the Prime Minister, but also for the future of devolution in Northern Ireland. And the complicating factor also in the mix, which is the fact that we have the local elections here in May as well. Does Jeffrey Donaldson want to go to the electorate saying that he's returning to power sharing, or does he want to hold back? We have competing interests here, and the business community have been very clear that the EU and the UK seem to know the detail of what they require. However, there are some concerns about what's being discussed up to this point, but they're going to be reading the deal at the same time as everyone else is.
Yes, of course, and really interesting that the Prime Minister held this roundtable with Northern Irish businesses in Downing Street last week. I wonder if they were briefed something that we don't know. But I suppose not long to wait now, just hours to go until that fated press conference between the Prime Minister and Ursula von der Leyen. For now, Amanda Ferguson, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this morning. Now, finally today, a revised energy price cap. That's due to come in this afternoon, announced by Ofgem. This draws into sharp focus our energy security here in the UK. Despite a new Department for Energy Security, our energy has potentially never looked less secure. Of course, last year, Rishi Sunak tore up Liz Truss's plans to deliver more homegrown shale gas energy onshore in the UK. And the SNP has been tearing its hair out over the prospect of more oil and gas licences in the North Sea. But turning to renewables, across the last 3 years, just 2 wind turbines have been built in the UK. Not 2 wind farms, 2 individual turbines, both, as it happens, on the Keele University campus. Now, all parties have been involved in blocking more energy being delivered in the UK. Labour fought tooth and nail to keep that ban on shale gas extraction, and the Wet Tories followed in their footsteps. And for their part, the Tories effectively banned onshore wind power. Meanwhile, the Lib Dems have been campaigning against nuclear power, and new reactors are banned by the Scottish Government. Of course, the Green Party opposes oil, gas, fracking, nuclear power, and solar farms too. Yes, solar farms. Remarkable to look at the record of elected Green Party representatives when it comes to proposed renewable developments. Take Longfield Solar Farm. Quote, "This scheme is too large, and I'm concerned about the impact on the valued landscape." That's from Green Party councillor James Abbott. That's what he thinks those proposals at Longfield, they're too big. Or take the Alfreton Solar Farm in Derbyshire. Now, as a Green Party candidate, you might expect me to be in favour of such a project, says Councillor Frank Addington Stringer, a Green, of course. However, I have a number of concerns which mean I cannot support this particular scheme. Now, again, he thinks that is too big. Or how about down in Hastings? Quote, "Obviously, the Green Party is in favour of increasing the supply of renewable energy. However, it has to be in the right place. And this is very far from the right place. It feels like tokenism, the council slapping a solar farm in the country park and then claiming to be acting on the climate crisis." Yes, Julia Hilton, the Green Party councillor on Hastings, says that she thinks that potential solar farm is tokenistic. In other words, too small. Some Greens opposing solar farms for being too big, others for being too small. Is there anywhere that we could put a solar farm in the UK? Of course, it's fascinating to see across all of these different areas, whether it's fracking, whether it's oil and gas, whether it's new nuclear, whether it's indeed solar or wind, there's opposition everywhere. Why is that? Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Dr. Lawrence Newport of Royal Holloway University of London, who's a YouTuber. And his recent vlog details how England has accidentally made lots of green technology practically illegal. Thank you for joining me this
Thank you very much for having me.
It's fascinating to look through. Most people would instinctively think that perhaps the Green Party, whilst it's obvious that they might not want to extract natural gas, surely they'd be in favour of solar. But it's not the case.
Well, that's exactly what I found the most shocking thing about researching the video. I thought I'd look at the government maybe has banned, I saw they essentially banned wind farms, and solar panels seem to be very difficult to build. There's legislative reasons why that's the case, but what really struck me was how time and time again, you had three of the good examples here that were also in my video as well, because they really stunned me. There's the same pattern over and over again, which is, of course, I'm very concerned about climate change. In fact, it's one of the worst things that could possibly happen. The world might end, these kind of things. And the next sentence is, however, though maybe we could build a solar park. Of course we should build a solar farm. Just not anywhere near me, which was just time and time again. And the video wasn't meant to be about that. It just ended up coming out of it because that's all I kept finding time and time again.
And it's fascinating looking at that video. We had time to show 3 examples here today, but there are so many more. It's almost anywhere in England, whether it's a place that's seen as too large, too big, too rural, too urban. Just about anywhere that you can. I think at one point you found, was it a scrapyard, a wastage
an old
site?
landfill, which they refused, planning on the basis that it didn't meet the biodiversity requirements.
Biodiversity for a landfill.
Yes.
I mean, it's getting to the point of farcical. And we're talking in a context today where people are worried about their energy bills, where prices are set to be going up in the coming months, and yet politicians seem to prioritise blocking development of new homegrown sources of energy rather than delivering the kind of things that would actually make people's lives easier.
And they're cheaper. Wind power is so much cheaper, and solar farms are getting more and more efficient and better pretty much every 6 months. So technology is advancing incredibly quickly. We were leading in a bunch of these areas, but because it's so difficult to build here, we're losing the companies abroad. So we're losing innovation, we're losing the companies, we're losing the expertise. We're also, unfortunately, as you say, making it so difficult to predict. If you're a company, why invest in Britain when surely I can build it on a landfill and you still can't build there. You can't build near a town if it has historic buildings. You can't build near a town if it doesn't because it might ruin the view. You can't build it if it's big, if it's small. If it's medium, no one seems to know quite what you're meant to build or what you're meant to predict you'll be allowed to do, which if you're a company, how do we argue that they should invest in us when they could go pretty much most other places and it's much easier?
And it's crucial to emphasise in this conversation that whilst when we were talking about renewable projects of decades past that involved significant taxpayer funding, these projects are about private investment, about companies using their own money to invest in the United Kingdom to create extra energy and more jobs. And the government, in all of its different forms, mostly local government, but many different forms as well, has been simply getting in the way, stopping this investment, stopping this growth, frankly. Are we subject to the whims of an anti-growth coalition?
I think 100%. Well, because how else do you describe this? It's been years of the same kind of legislation, and then at a local level, not local people, often solar farms are quite popular locally, and in fact wind farms are quite popular locally. But if you allow political groups locally to have their own choices, they nearly always oppose. Not in principle. In principle, everyone's on side. The way that I put it in the video is, in Britain, everyone supports you on solar farms, so long as it's not near them, near where they work, near where they might live, or near anywhere they ever drive through or know exists. And that's a problem. If your political class thinks in that way, that is genuinely not going to allow your country to grow, and it's not going to allow you to innovate and really take the expertise of Britain and build good industries that we were leading the world in. And we've allowed that to slip through our fingertips.
What do you say to the people that say that the United Kingdom isn't the biggest country in the world? It used to be the world's only superpower. Pax Britannica lasted for 100 years, but that time has now gone. We're now a small island, and frankly, we shouldn't be thinking about growing or investing, or we should basically stay as we are.
I think that's entirely wrong. I mean, we are the country that invented the Industrial Revolution. No other country has done it in Earth's history, and it's the greatest leap forward that's ever occurred. Life expectancy is now ridiculous. I mean, it used to be like about 30 years old. 6 out of 10 children die before they were 15. After the Industrial Revolution, that is not the case, and it's caused a massive reduction in global poverty. We obviously see much less poverty here. There's still poverty, but much less than there was 200 years ago. And that was us. That was this country that did that. And I don't think there's any reason to suspect, in a world of technological growth, where we've got all of these, we've got great universities, we've got great institutions, and we've also got fantastic businesses. There's no reason why we can't invest in those and invest in us and see just how incredible the kinds of things that we will be able to create are.
And I suppose the worry is, if we sort of try and freeze things as they are now in aspic, other countries are advancing. And the Labour Party this morning has been saying that Poland in the next decade is due to become richer than the United Kingdom. 5 years ago, that would have been unimaginable. But I suppose that's now the course that we're on.
And it's easy to see. If you take what's happening with solar farms and you take what's happening with wind farms and you multiply that up at every level, you see how you can't do anything in Britain. It shouldn't take us 11 years to build a wind farm, which is what it does right now. It took 2 years to build the Empire State Building. It's not as difficult for us to build a wind farm as it is for them to build the Empire State Building.
Wind farms, railways, university laboratories, we can't build anything at the moment. Hopefully the government is listening and maybe some change might be around the corner. That's it for us today. Thank you to all my guests. But up next, it's Bev Turner Today.
Very good morning. It's 10 o'clock on Monday, the 27th of February. I'm Bev Turner. Today, Brexit overhauled. It's the most important day since we voted to leave the EU as Rishi Sunak meets European Commission President for final talks on Northern Ireland. Will this be good for the entire United Kingdom? There's a lot riding on this today, not only the UK's relationship with the EU, of course, but also remember America. Starmer's waiting in the wings to pounce on the outcome, and Arlene Foster holds many cards too. She's going to be joining me very soon. Also this morning, sensitivity readers. First Roald Dahl got the sanitising treatment, and now the James Bond books too. Are they protecting your feelings or just moving with the times? Only a few weeks until the energy price cap is lowered by nearly £1,000. What will it mean for you, your budget, and when can we expect prices to start coming down? I'll be telling you all you need to know. Hope you had a great weekend. Let me know what you think about those stories. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Lots ahead this morning, a couple of great guests as well. But first, let's get you up to date with what's happening here and around the world with Tamsin.